was lunch. Pretty great, pretty great. Awesome, awesome. It is my pleasure to introduce the Honorable Jason Miyares. Jason Miyares' story doesn't start in Virginia, but in Havana, Cuba, when his mother, Miriam Miyares, fled communist Cuba, penniless and homeless. She taught Jason a love for freedom, democracy, and that America is indeed the last best hope on earth. A product of Virginia Public Schools, Jason graduated with a bachelor's in business administration from James Madison University and received his JD from the College of William & Mary School of Law. He previously served as a prosecutor in the Virginia Beach Commonwealth's Attorney Office, where he worked alongside law enforcement to keep criminals off our streets and our communities safe. In 2015, almost 50 years to the day that she fled Cuba, Miriam was able to vote for her son, Jason Miyares, to represent her in the oldest democracy in the Western Hemisphere, the Virginia House of Delegates. While representing Virginia Beach, Jason was recognized as Legislator of the Year in both 2018 and 2019. Jason Miyares is the first Cuban American ever elected to the General Assembly, the first Hispanic elected statewide in Virginia, and the first son of an immigrant ever elected to be Attorney General. He is passionate about preserving the American miracle for the next generation of Virginians. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Jason Miyares.
Wow. I want to get that introduction every time I come out with the bumper music. It is great to be here. It's great to be with you because, like you, many years ago, I'm not going to age myself, but I was attending YAF conferences as a young college student, learning about those amazing timeless principles that have made this country indeed the last best hope on earth. And here in Washington, D.C., which it's great to be back in the single most dysfunctional city in all of America. You know, it's been said that Ronald Reagan can never tell a lie, and Bill Clinton can never tell the truth, and Joe Biden simply can't tell the difference. In Virginia, what we have, are there any Virginians in the house? Wonderful. In Virginia, what we have is what we're calling the Virginia Renaissance, and it is shocking to think of where we have been just in a couple of years. It's been about roughly 2 years since we shocked the world in winning in Virginia. And it's been roughly 3 years since Joe Biden was shocked to find out he had run for president. But so many of those issues that animated our election in Virginia and animated our victory in Virginia still are with us today, and I think are some of the most defining moments of our time, and it's part of the reason why you're here. I've been asked a lot, when did you all think you were going to win in Virginia? It was the time as Virginia was considered a, quote, blue state. Joe Biden had won it by 10 points. And I'll never forget, we were in deep blue Alexandria at the farmer's market there at a rally. It was a Saturday before the election. And we get there, and Glenn Youngkin is giving his remarks, and it is a sea of red. I don't think you've ever seen that much red in deep blue Alexandria. And I'm standing there, and I look to my left, and there's Dana Bash from CNN standing right next to me, unbeknownst to me. And her eyes were so big. She looked at me and she said, "I think you're going to win." But she did not say that with any joy in her heart. I mean, it was like somebody had just run over her dog. And I said, I think you're right. And I remember a mom coming up to me saying, "Listen, I've never voted Republican before in my life. I'm voting for the first time now." And I said, "Well, thank you. Do you mind telling me why?" And she said, "Yeah, because too many politicians have forgotten a very important truth. Never, ever, ever get between a mother and her child." And I just said, "Yes, ma'am," and I won't forget it. And that's really what's animated so much of what we've done in Virginia. But what I've somewhat realized, you've seen this on your college campuses, is so much of the fracturing we've seen in our American politics is because it used to be there were so many principles that both parties, both philosophies would agree on, but one party walked away from it. If I was to say to you just 5 years ago, parents have a fundamental right to the education upbringing of their children, that would not be considered a controversial statement. Now, according to certain liberal news outlets, that's considered dog whistle politics. And when Terry McAuliffe said the quiet part out loud, I think it fundamentally changed where we were in Virginia, because what we did is we put on our ticket sign 2 simple words: parents matter. And they have from the beginning. My welcome to the NFL moment was shortly after we got sworn in. We went up to Mr. Jefferson's Capitol in Richmond, and the Governor Youngkin signed a series of executive orders, and then he turned to me and said, "Congratulations, go defend these." And I remember we made those decisions of parents matter affected so many of the policy decisions, including the decision whether your child to be masked or not. It's a really radical notion that you as a parent get to make that decision. And I remember getting a call from a parent. We won our case in Loudoun on the masking decision. And she had heard over the AP wire we'd won the case, and now parents can make that decision. And I remember she called me. And she said, "My daughter, Haley, is ecstatic that we get to make that decision, and she doesn't have to wear a mask when she goes to school tomorrow." And sometimes as conservatives lose that connection of how so much of what government policy can have such a dramatic impact on people's well-beings. And I said, well, I'm sure like a lot of children, she gets annoyed by having to wear a mask. She's like, it's not that. Is that for tomorrow, for the very first time when she goes to school, Haley will get to see what her best friend at school actually even looks like. And you think, what have we done and what have our kids gone through the last couple of years? If I was to say to you just 5 years ago that we should strive toward Dr. King's dream, that we should judge you not by the color of your skin, but by the content of your character, that would not be considered a controversial statement. That would be something that all Americans could unite and agree upon. How far we have come from that vision. One of the things I'm most proud of is that we're investigating and looking into some of what is happening in Fairfax with Thomas Jefferson School for Science and Technology. It's a magnet school that up until 2 years ago, this was their very radical admissions policy. You know what their admissions policy was? If you had the grades and you had the test scores, you could go. And then what happened is Fairfax hired an equity consultant out of Berkeley, California. You probably know where this is going. They paid this equity consultant $455,000 for about 9 months of work to come up with a, quote, equity strategic plan. And this equity strategic plan says, for students, your aim should be equal outcomes for every student without exception. Think about that. Equal outcomes for every student without exception. Well, folks, equity without excellence is emptiness. And what we saw was once Fairfax adopted this, quote, equity strategic plan, we saw close to a 20-point drop in Asian student enrollment at Thomas Jefferson High School in a little over a year. And as one mom said, my daughter has done everything right since the first grade. She has gotten straight A's. And I realized she's likely to be denied her dream, not because of a lack of hard work, not because of anything that she has done or not done. It's simply because of who she is, because she's Korean American. Folks, I don't want to live in America where somebody's being denied their dream simply because of who they are, because of their background. And that is, I think, some of the stakes that we are faced with here in this country. But I will tell you this, the greatest legacy, and I've told this to Governor Youngkin, the greatest challenge that we face right now is the fact that you have an entire generation of young people that have forgotten who we are as Americans. Like a lot of families, I have Disney Plus, I have 3 daughters, and I remember it was a night I wasn't on the road, and we had a movie night, asked what they wanted to see, and they said, well, let's go see The Lion King. So we had not seen it in years. And there's this powerful scene in The Lion King. It's probably the first time we've heard a political figure talk about a Disney cartoon before, but here we go. But it really struck with me. There's a scene in The Lion King where, if you know the story, Simba has run away from home. He's not wanting to face his problems. I love to tell my staff, bad news doesn't get better with age. And he runs away, and he's in the wilderness. And he has a vision of his father from the past. And his father says, you have forgotten. You have forgotten who you really are, and therefore you can't become who you are meant to be. A free society cannot remain free if an entire generation of young people have forgotten what has made this the last best hope on earth. It has been told about my mother's story. I love to ask young people when I speak on college campuses, why did she come here? What was so unique about this country? It's because she was desperate to live in a society that recognized that she had certain rights that came from God and did not come from government, and therefore could not be taken away from her. So many young people have such a distorted view of what this country is, and that breaks my heart. Margaret Thatcher once said that all the countries in Europe emerged out of history, but America is the only country to ever emerge out of a philosophy. Or as G.K. Chesterton noted, America is the only country in the history of the world to be founded on a creed. What is that creed? I think the American that best encapsulated it was Dr. Martin Luther King on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where he said those certain inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, he said, that is the promissory note that has been made to every American, past, present, and future. And he was there to collect on that promissory note. Thank God that he did. And the question I love to point out to young people is, who wrote the promissory note? Was it Confucius? Was it Rousseau? It was a quiet, unassuming lawyer from Charlottesville who was not a great speaker, but he was a brilliant thinker. And he wrote the promissory note, the birth certificate for a new nation that was going to do it differently. 99% of every human being that has ever lived on this planet did not have freedom of speech. Do you know that? 99% of every human being that ever lived did not live in a society with any concept of freedom of press or that you could speak your mind. 99% of every human being that has ever lived on this planet did not have freedom of religion. 99% of every human being that has ever lived on this planet had no choice who their leader was. When we talk about those words that you hear on your college campuses like privileged, we should talk about American privilege, because the way you live your life is abnormal. We sit in this amazing ballroom in this capital city with so much luxury. And sometimes just think about this for a second. As you sit where you are, there are millions upon millions upon millions of people that would do everything in their power. They would crawl over broken glass. They would tie inner tubes together and cross a shark-infested waterway. They would cling to the side of an airplane to be seated exactly where you're seated right now. You won life's lottery when you woke up this morning in this country at this time. I tell my daughters all the time, gratitude is the most underrated of human traits. Ingratitude is perhaps the ugliest. Gratitude is perhaps the most underrated. I was raised to have such incredible gratitude that I could breathe the air as a free American. That is something right now that is missing on our college campuses. On our way here, Axios had an article looking at young people's view of this country, and only 18% of young Americans ages 18 to 34 are proud to be American. Folks, that breaks my heart. People ask me sometimes, what worries you? And in my role as Attorney General, given the amount of work I do with both Homeland Security and then also with other law enforcement agencies, there's a lot that comes across my desk. A lot of it's disturbing. That's not what keeps me up at night. What keeps me up at night is the fact that we have so many young people that have such a different view of what this country is. The most shocking, jarring thing for me is this. I can go in a span of just a week where I will on one hand speak at a naturalization ceremony. I spoke at one last month at Patrick Henry's ancestral home in Red Hill. It was amazing. 60 new Americans. See, one of my earliest memories was my mother walking into our kitchen and asking me to teach her the Pledge of Allegiance. Those are those memories you have as a child that stick with you when you realize my family's different. And then witnessing as a child her accepting and taking that oath of allegiance to the United States. And so when I can go in a span of just 7 days, where on one hand I speak at a naturalization ceremony, and I get to say it is the honor of my life to welcome you to our new American family on the pathway to freedom. And at the end of that ceremony, we will hand them a $1 American flag. And it's like handing them a diamond. It's a precious, precious moment. And then I can go 7 days later, and I could speak on a college campus or some prep school where the tuition costs more than my car. And the only word I can use to describe how they view America is disdain. Utter, complete disdain. It is not the children of immigrants that have this view. It is oftentimes, tragically, the children of privilege. And it goes back to when I say both gratitude is the most underrated of human traits, ingratitude is often the ugliest of human traits. That's why the mission of Young Americans Foundation is so important. Because ultimately, you're at the front lines of creating a new view of the distorted lens that so many of these young people have. And it is an awesome, awesome charge. It will not be easy because you are going against the tide of so many loud voices that are going to be challenging you. Whenever I talk to young people, and I encourage you to ask this question in your college campuses and your professors, when you look at the United States, the question is not where we have fallen short. The question is actually, compared to what? If you compare us to where we have fallen short of our ideals, yes, we have. We have some incredibly horrific chapters in our nation's history, and we should study that. We should see where we have fallen short so we can learn from that. But the question is, compared to what? If you're comparing us to perfection, we fail. But if you compare us to every other country on the planet, we've given more second chances to more people from more races, background, faiths, and creed than any country in the history of the world, and it's not even close. We're the first country with a written constitution that actually limits the power of government and empowers the individual. And it is amazing what happens when you empower the individual. We live at a time where we've seen the greatest eradication of poverty in human history in the last 4 decades. You know that? In 1980, roughly 20% of the globe lived on roughly $2 a day or less. That's considered starvation level poverty. That number today is less than 5%. It's amazing when I'm on a college campus and I'll ask them, what happened? What led to the greatest eradication of poverty in human history? Sometimes they say the United Nations. Sometimes they say Obamacare, which that was an interesting answer. But I point out, it's a word that is oftentimes almost a 4-letter word on a college campus. It's capitalism. It's free markets. It's basically saying if you have an idea and a talent and a service, you're going to be rewarded for that. In so many countries in so many different areas of the globe, whether it's in Chile or South Korea or Hong Kong or India or China, they did not necessarily liberalize their political structure, but they liberalized their economy, and they went away from a top-down government control of their economy to say, we're going to empower you, the individual. You have a God-given talent, you're going to be rewarded for that talent. And it's amazing what happens when you do that. And it's not just that the economy thrives, it's the arts, it's the sciences. Because what we did here was different. We limited government and empowered the individual. That is words, that is a lesson that is lost right now in so many young people. And if you don't think we're different, then I would encourage you, after today, go on YouTube and type in the opening ceremony of the Summer Olympics. I grew up in the Cold War. During the Reagan years, I used to love the Olympics. I still do. I love to see what the host country wants to show off of the very, very best of their country. And so I love the Parade of Nations. You all know what that is? The Parade of Nations, all the countries walk in. They start off with Greece because they held the first Olympic Games, and then they go in alphabetical order. So it'll be Albania, Botswana, and the last Olympic Games was in Tokyo, the most recent ones. And you get to that magical moment after going in alphabetical order where they announce us. The delegation from the United States of America. And the doors open, and you notice there's something different. 119 countries walked into that stadium in Tokyo, and only one out of 119 did the delegation actually look like the entire world. Every race, every color, every creed. It's like this visual reminder that did more to refute this idea of wokeism, that America is somehow irredeemably racist and broken. Because if you're saying America is inherently racist and broken, what you're really saying is America cannot heal itself, cannot redeem itself, and actually will always be at conflict with itself. That is not what we need in today's new multipolar world, where you have a People's Republic of China that is looking to supplant the American century with a Chinese one. I remember sitting in a classroom, and I had a young man who challenged me. He said he did not view America as in any way a good country at all, that he viewed America as a irredeemably racist, sexist, bigoted country. And I said, I never said that America was a perfect country, but she is a noble one. And he said, prove it. Now, the easy answer would have been to tell him to just simply walk or drive over to Arlington National Cemetery. But I realize we live in a society and an age where every young person is tethered to this phone. So I told the class, take out your cell phones. In fact, I'm going to give you special dispensation. Everybody take out their cell phone right now. I told this student, go to Google, type in 3 words. We'll do this right now. Korea at night. Korea at night. And it pops up, satellite image of the Korean Peninsula at night. And I said, it's amazing you have a peninsula where the people speak the same language, have the same culture. In the southern half, you see a country with light. People are there enjoying the arts, plays, they're picking up newspapers that criticize their governments. They have democracy and freedom. And then you look in the north and it's darkness. It's utter, complete darkness. And I asked this young person, why is it that you have a peninsula of the same people, the one live in the light, and yet you have millions that live in darkness? Why? And he didn't know the answer. And I said, it's because over 40,000 Americans crossed an ocean, going to a land where they didn't speak the language, they didn't know the people, they fought, they bled, and they died, defending a people they barely knew from one of the worst tyrannies the world had ever seen, Soviet communism. And they didn't ask for treasure, they didn't ask for glory, and the only land they ever asked for was a place to bury their dead. And you don't even know that it happened. And I realize they don't call the Korean War the Forgotten War for a reason. Should we teach all of our history? Sure. But at a time when only 18% of young people are proud to be American, perhaps we should also teach history like that, of the selfless sacrifice that has happened so often, so people that we don't even know can live in the altar of freedom. Plato once said that the two most important questions a civilization can ask itself is who teaches the children and what do they teach them? You are the vanguard on our college campuses as ambassadors for what I call the American miracle, that we are indeed at our core an exceptional, noble, and decent country. Indeed, my mother fled Cuba in the fall of 1965 with nothing. And almost 50 years to the day that she left, she was able to go into a voting booth and get a ballot with my name on it and be able to vote for me in the oldest democracy in the Western Hemisphere, the Virginia General Assembly. That is indeed the American miracle. I'm reminded of what an Italian immigrant once noted the first time they ever laid eyes on the Statue of Liberty. They said, that is the greatest light the world has ever seen since the Star of Bethlehem. I feel that in my bones. You do too. It's an honor to be in the trenches with you. It's an honor to fight alongside of you on preserving indeed what is the last best hope on earth. Thanks you much for hosting me. Thank you for being passionate. By being here today and being passionate about this issue, you're a leader. You could be anywhere you wanted to today. You could be at home, you could be at the beach, but you're here today because what Young Americans does is it trains the next generation of leaders. Somebody in this room will one day be in a position of authority. Might not be an elected position, but you will be in some type of position of authority. And what I ask of you, beg of you, is to take the time to invest in the follow generation so we are not, as Reagan warned us, that one generation away from extinction. Thank you so much. Thank you for your mission. And the Lord continue to bless you and protect you. God bless you.
All right, we'll be starting another Q&A session. You can line up at the back of the room towards the exits. We are on the right side of the room from the audience. If you could come up, say your name, what school you go to, and a brief question. Okay. Sebastian Griffin, University of Idaho College of Law in Idaho. So my question for you is on the discussion of making the Office of Attorney General nonpartisan. Do you, as an Attorney General, see that the law is clear enough for this to be the case, or do we need to decipher leaders by political party to ensure that the fullest extent of the law is covered and decided?
I mean, I think part of your role, I don't care if it's Attorney General or what levers of government you are, is to look at the plain reading and not, as I tell often my staff, my job is not to wish what the law was, wish it what it would be. It's to be what the law actually is. And so that means sometimes making tough decisions. It means sometimes my role as Attorney General is I'm defending laws that when I was in the General Assembly, I didn't necessarily support, but I believe in both democracy and I believe in the concept that as long as it's not unconstitutional against the U.S. Constitution, the Virginia Constitution, my job is to defend it. But I do think it goes to a greater point of what I have oftentimes seen in government is people just essentially wanting the law to be a certain way and then they just get there. And we've seen that with the Biden administration. The dirty little secret of part of the reason why Washington is dysfunctional in my opinion, is that you've had the explosion of the administrative state. You have all these alphabet soup agencies that promulgate rules and regulations, and yet they're never voted on by your congressman or your senator. So you take OSHA. OSHA is not an elected body. They're the ones that promulgated the regulation that says you have to have your employee be vaccinated or fired, to millions and millions of small business owners. And as I pointed out to the media, this wasn't something debated in Congress. It wasn't debated on the House floor. And the dirty little secret is, candidly, a lot of folks in Congress prefer it that way because then they don't have to make hard votes, and therefore they don't have to be accountable. So I actually think it is incredible. One of the roles we say as Attorney General, at least I tell my staff, is we view ourselves as the people's protector. I have over 20 different sections that report to me, everything from major crimes, I have to approve every wiretap from the state police, to civil rights and consumer protection. But it's overwhelming, the idea that we're the people's protector, and that includes overreach from the federal government. And listen, the founders designed it that way. They designed it that the way that we have it with, in a good number of countries, the idea of a two-tiered chamber of Congress was unheard of. But they were very sober-minded, and they wanted a system that was set up that actually would force people to both debate, discuss, and that is the opposite of an administrative state that can pass these rules and regulations that don't have to use Congress. And I think it's incredibly dangerous precedent. So I think it goes back to, I think, also another larger issue. One of the biggest problems in government that I have seen is people assume if they have good intentions, will guarantee good results. Nobody in the private sector works that way. Nobody says, I want you to measure success by my intentions, right? Nobody in business could survive that way. Nobody in the military could survive that way. Nobody on a sports team could say, well, why did you go for it on 4th and 27? Well, my intention was to get that first down. Nobody could survive that way in a sports team by telling their coach, well, this is what my intention was. It's about what the results are. It is only somehow we've allowed this to happen that people in power are allowed to be measured and judged by success by their intentions, not by the results of the policies they're putting forth. And I think that is one of the lack of accountability, I think, is one of the most important aspects we should seek in elected leaders, not just as Attorney General, but in all offices. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Isabel. I'll be attending Regent School of Law in a few weeks.
Regent in Virginia Beach?
Yes.
Outstanding.
Mm-hmm. As a former law student yourself, I was wondering if you have any advice for me as an incoming law student and others alike.
Get a good study buddy. Do not allow, my best advice, some of it is my faith aspect, but when the good Lord says keep the Sabbath, I think he recognizes us better than we know ourselves. You need a day of rest. So I would do my very, very best to keep Sundays as a way to clear my head, what I would focus on. Something that was indeed rest and not just crack the books. And I think if you could do that and then keep both your friends. One of the best pieces of advice I'd say this is a general life advice for not just people going to law school. A week before I got sworn in, a dear friend of mine gave me this piece of advice. He said, never, ever, ever let praise go to your head or criticism go to your heart. And that has served me so well, particularly in a role. And I would say that serves you well in any position you're in, either in school, in law school, or in your career. Don't let praise go to your head, and don't let criticism go to your heart. Because oftentimes you learn more in life from your mistakes than your victories. But I think if you keep that even keel and make sure that you keep your faith and your family as a center, law school is not going to be nearly as stressful. I actually had a great experience in law school. Built some deep, deep friendships, and I also got married during law school too, so that definitely helps. So, thank you.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Panton. I'm a law student at Chicago-Kent College of Law. Sir, you had mentioned earlier that only 18% of young people were proud to be an American. In your opinion, is this more due to people having disdain for our country or for people lacking knowledge of their constitutional freedoms?
I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think we've had a really difficult couple of years as a country. Sometimes when you live into your history, you don't realize you're living through this seismic event until you get on the other side. And the COVID shutdown, I think, has had such a dramatic impact, particularly for young people. You know, if you've ever had a loved one that has struggled with either addiction or depression, they will tell you that social isolation is the single worst box they can ever find themselves in. And that's what we did to 300 million Americans for 12 to 18 months. And so I think when you look at the impact of where we are as a country, we have so many people your age that are hurting. And when I say they don't realize that there's so many people that wish they could trade spots with them. The total drug overdose deaths in America in 1992 was 5,900. The total drug overdose deaths in the United States last year was 108,000. So to put things in perspective, we had 55,000 men and women we lost to the Vietnam War over the course of 15 plus years. So it's the equivalent of 2 Vietnam Wars every 12 months in this country. So the cartels are conducting chemical warfare on us. It's a whole separate discussion. But you have so many young people that are having skyrocketing deaths of despair. Deaths of despair defined as either suicide or drug overdose. And sometimes they don't realize how blessed they are. I think that's part of it. I do think we have a curriculum that constantly points out where America has failed rather than where we have succeeded. As Governor Youngkin's noted, we should teach all of our history, the good and the bad. But when you have such a distorted lens where you view the United States somehow an intrinsically evil, broken country, who wants to live in a country like that? I had a Marine tell me he viewed what's happening in our education system as a national security matter. Because how do you ask somebody to be willing to, if need be, die for their country if they're told from the very beginning that their country is irretrievably broken, racist, and evil? And so I do think some of the curriculum is having a part of that. So this is what I loved about President Reagan. None of you all were alive to remember that. But what Reagan did probably better than anybody I can ever recall is this unbridled sense of optimism. Nobody wants or is attracted to people that are dour. Yeah, we have problems. Of course we have problems. And we're debating some really huge consequential issues in this country. But people will be more attractive to your side and your conservative principles if they see you do it with a smile on your face and this sense of optimism. And it is true, I tell people, if you're ever not proud to be American, just go to naturalization ceremonies. That will renew your faith in this country, because those individuals who have seen actual oppression, they have come from countries where they've been oppressed, sometimes because they're in the wrong caste system or they are literally of the wrong ethnic group. They know that this is a unique country. I had the New York Times called me a couple months ago, and that's when you're supposed to say, I'm sorry, right? But they wanted to ask me this. They wanted to say, why are so many both Latino and Asian Americans starting to shift towards the GOP? And what I said to them was, it's because it used to be that both parties talked about the American dream. Now one party does, and the other party talks about the American nightmare. So think about it, if you're a new immigrant to this country and you've actually seen unbelievable oppression and poverty and no respect for human dignity, and you have one party that celebrates who we are and another party that says, no, you don't understand. America's awful. No, America's not awful. We're new immigrants. We've seen absolute depravity. This is an amazing country, and I think it gives us such an opportunity. But I do think it's important for us to say it with both a smile and a sense of optimism, which I think President Reagan did as well as anybody that in modern American history, by far. So thank you.
All right, that's going to conclude our Q&A portion. Thank you.
How's it going, NCSC? Awesome, awesome. My name's Jack Watkins. I'm a YAF intern here. I go to University of Florida. Go Gators. And it is my pleasure and honor to introduce our next speaker, Congressman Dan Crenshaw. Originally from the Houston area, Representative Dan Crenshaw is a proud sixth-generation Texan. From an early age, Dan knew that he wanted to serve his country with the most elite fighting force in history, the U.S. Navy SEALs. In 2006, Dan graduated from Tufts University, where he earned his Naval Officer Commission through Navy ROTC. Following graduation, he immediately reported to the SEALs training in Coronado, California. After graduating SEAL training, Dan deployed in Fallujah, Iraq to join SEAL Team 3, his first of 5 deployments overseas. On Dan's third deployment in 2012, his life changed forever. After 6 months of combat operations, he was hit with an IED blast during a mission in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Learning that his right eye had been destroyed in the blast and his left eye was badly damaged, the doctors did not know if he would ever see again. Eventually regaining his sight in his left eye, Dan went on to deploy twice more in the Middle East and South Korea. After serving 10 years in the SEAL teams, he left service with 2 Bronze Stars, 1 with Valor, the Purple Heart, and the Navy Commendation Medal with Valor, among others. In November 2018, Dan was elected to represent the people of Texas's 2nd Congressional District and since has served on several congressional committees. Dan believes in service before self, understands that there's no higher calling than service to the American people. Although he can no longer fight on the battlefield, the lessons he learned in the SEAL teams are present every day in his fight for common sense solutions in Congress. Please welcome Congressman Dan Crenshaw.
How y'all doing? All right, it's great to see you. This is day 2 of this conference. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for coming out and just being part of the political movement, being part of civics, the things that drive our country towards a better future. Thank you for being a part of it. And thanks for being part of this great organization that I think fights for the right kind of conservative values and the right tone and the right way to win. And that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk for too long because if I think we have, 45 minutes or so, and the more time we leave for questions, the more time we make this a discussion, I think the more entertaining it is, and the less likely it is that you just fall asleep because you've just been listening to people talk at you for forever. I do have some things to say, and maybe that'll drive some questions. Not so much about the specifics of what we've been up to in Congress. There's a lot, I mean, when you get to Congress, you kind of choose a major. It's like going to college. You literally have orientation. You're part of a freshman class, and then you choose your committees and what you're going to focus on. You're basically choosing majors and minors, and I guess I triple major. I major on energy issues, I major on healthcare issues, and then I major on generally national security issues. Lately, that's been highly focused on Mexican drug cartels. And so that's how you start. But we can get into those details if you'd like. Just ask me questions about that stuff if you'd like. I'd like to talk to you more about what our general problem is and then how we address it. So our general problem is we have an entire political party that doesn't really believe in the whole founding documents thing. Okay, that's the general problem that we run into. More of this belief in what I would call liberal populism. I'm not really a big fan of the word populism. I know a lot on the right use it. Nationalists, populists, whatever. It means we're doing what the people want. Is that what you're doing? Because the whole point of the founding is to develop a framework for figuring out how we all live together sensibly. That's basically what politics is. In human history, we have thousands of years of history of just killing each other when we want something or we disagree on something. Politics is the art of disagreement without violence. And so it's pretty important how you establish kind of a framework to agree or disagree with each other. And that framework is set about pretty clearly in the Constitution. Populism would be just, hey, let's just take a vote, see what's more popular. And so 51% of this room could vote that the other 49% have to give the other 51% all their stuff. You can call it democracy, you can call it popular. Populism leads to strange places, right? It leads to this sort of politics of bribery, where I, as a politician, can just promise you stuff, bribe you, the voter, say, look, whatever you're feeling, it's right. Your truth is your truth, and I'm here to tell you that it's somebody else's fault that you're feeling that way, and I will take from that group and give to your group. To me, that's populism. It's telling voters what they want to hear instead of the truth. It's happening on the right. It's always happened on the left. Eventually, those political spectrums meet full circle. It's why I saw people on the right back in COVID times saying that it was a good idea to just give everyone $2,000 COVID checks. Oh, well, why not 3,000? Why not 4,000? Who cares about limiting principles? That's just some conservative jargon. Who cares? That's populism. That's how populism infects a good conservative movement. So don't let it happen. We'll talk maybe more about that. But the left has always subscribed to this stuff. Okay, they don't really care about foundational principles, right? If you imagine yourself as a buoy floating in the ocean, a good conservative is supposed to be anchored somewhere. You can move left and right, you use your frameworks, your principles to solve problems, but you're still anchored. And those foundations are important, right? They're moral foundations, they're economic foundations, they're philosophical foundations, and they come from a long history of stuff that works, whether it came from Jerusalem or Rome or London or all these good ideas that we kind of figured out over time. And then our founders, good thing they were good historians even without Google. They managed to write all those principles down in Philadelphia and create this experiment that we have now that we're so intent on protecting. But a liberal isn't really anchored into anything because they tend to believe that, well, they're progressive, right? They should just keep progressing towards whatever new emotional whim the public has. This is why I call it populism, right? They love to tell people what they want to hear based on the emotional trend at that time. I mean, shit, right now it's like, let's transition children into a different sex. Like, you didn't believe that 5 minutes ago. No freaking way you believed that 5 minutes ago, and now it's like your thing. I mean, come on. Because they have no anchor. Right? And there's some good liberals that you know, right? There's some liberals who I think they just feel more, right? I think they're genuinely concerned about things like inequality and injustices. Like, there's some good liberals. There's a good balance between good conservatism and good liberalism. But the problem with liberals is that they're easily persuaded by progressives or leftists or whatever we want to call them. But we do have to classify them differently because they are different. And progressives are on a whole different level, right? Progressives are like, let's just tear it all down, French Revolutionary style, and just start over. Just start over because everything sucks. And every problem we have, it's because of the system and the Constitution. That's pretty dangerous, right? That we have some history to maybe look back to see what happens when you do that, like the French Revolution. And they had this whole thing called the terror, which, like, there's no good way to define the terror. It means terrorist, like, it means bad stuff, and it means a lot of people died. And that's effectively what their solutions are. Tear it all down, start anew. Why? Because they're utopianists, fundamentally. And so they're always striving for utopia. They're always thinking in their heads, God, I wish everything should be so much perfect than it is now. We should have this. We shouldn't have these problems. Human nature should be different. So they're always trying to change human nature. And they never will be successful. And the more they try, the more they'll actually deteriorate the society they're trying to help. We see it over and over and over again. You see it in our greatest cities that have been infected by this disease, this ideological disease. The proof is right there. And you don't have to look just in the last 10 years. You can look throughout human history. So this is effectively what you're dealing with. And you're dealing with people who say that their foundations are things like injustice and inequality and compassion. So they think very differently. And, but they also define those words very differently. They don't define injustice the way I think our courts would define injustice. They define injustice quite differently. So you should define it as person A infringes on the inalienable rights of person B. Their life, liberty, or property. Maybe they steal from them. Maybe they harm them physically, intrude on their property. There's lots of ways to define that. Maybe they do something completely unfair. Maybe you hire somebody because they're your friend and you didn't hire somebody who's more qualified. You could argue that that's an injustice. They don't really define injustice that way. They define injustice as disparities. right? They see disparities throughout society, and they say that, well, there's clearly an injustice there as opposed to other factors that contribute to that disparity. That's one way they do it. They see groups of people, on average, doing worse than other groups of people on average, and they say that's because of an injustice, therefore you must punish the group doing better. Right, so they have these like sort of 6 degrees of separation of injustice. I had this debate with a student at Harvard. She was like an editor at the Harvard Crimson, and this court case had just come down about affirmative action, and it was an interesting conversation. I wish I had recorded it just for my own podcast, because she brought up this sort of form of injustice, right? Like how can, but because some people, let's say this group of people, based on their ancestry, possibly is doing worse, therefore shouldn't you punish them? And I tried to lay it out for her in this way. You cannot define injustice that way. Look where this leads. You're literally, it's 6 degrees of separation. You're literally punishing someone who had nothing to do with this other person, who also had nothing to do with the previous injustice years earlier. Like, that's a real problem, but that's how they define it. Inequality, they define rather differently too. You might define inequality or say unfair inequality as you working for 10 hours but getting the exact same benefit that somebody who works for only 2 hours, right? That would be some kind of unequal treatment. They define it totally different, right? They think that everybody should just have the exact same thing, no matter how much they work. So there's a very different definitions being used by the left. You have to understand how they think before you even start debating them on whatever issue you want to debate them on. We are operating from a different framework. Conservatives should be operating from a different framework. And that framework should be basically based on limiting principles. When we examine a policy, we have a framework with which to examine that policy. And it's based on limiting principles. It's based on certain questions, right? Does this policy infringe on the rights of an individual? Does, for the benefit of the rights of someone else? And you can think of some examples that would do that. Look at like healthcare for all. Well, you could force doctors to treat everyone we want them to treat, and we could also force them to take a certain amount of payment for that. What would that make them, though? It'd make them conscripts in the healthcare system. You would be taking away their freedom to, one, sell their labor the way they want to, and to work the amount of hours they want to. You could make someone feel safer by taking away somebody else's guns, but you're infringing on that person whose guns you're taking away, because now they can't defend themselves, just to make somebody else feel better who is not connected to them at all. Right, so we ask these questions about fairness and about infringement on personal rights. We ask if it's fiscally sustainable. The left doesn't really care about fiscal sustainability. We at least ask. I'm not going to say we have an amazing track record with that either, but at least we ask the questions. God, at least we pretend to care. Is this going to be fiscally sustainable for our next generation? If we just keep giving benefits to people in order to bribe them for their votes, is this going to be fiscally sustainable? That is a limiting principles question. Here's another one, which gets to the problem of giving people free money, just because it's COVID, right? Does the policy that you're proposing create independence or dependence? Is it a hand up, or is it just dooming them to a lifetime of dependence on government? And what is the limiting principle? How do you examine that number, that right number? That's why I got so mad at our own side when they start going that direction, because our side becomes so obsessed with winning and beating the left that they forget about their own principles sometimes. This has happened way too often. The left weaponizes government, so we have to weaponize government. The left wants to bribe people, so we have to bribe people. And it just becomes the politics of anger and resentment, and it's not a winning message. And also, you'll never outbribe the Democrats, right? You'll never outspend them. You'll never just give free stuff them. That was really good English. Don't worry about it. Trust me. I went to Harvard. And so you can't fight on those grounds. You actually have to fight for who we are. What is conservatism? People ask. I say, look, it is a series of limiting principles that gives us a framework with which to solve problems. That's what conservatism is. It is a process-oriented philosophy. Liberalism is a whatever the heck you want it to be kind of philosophy, depending on the trend at the time. Now, to be clear, there's some healthy balance if those two things are in balance. There's something healthy about that, because there's one side that wants constant change, and there's one side that says, hold on, We have a framework with which to deal with change, right? We have some inalienable rights that we have to adhere to when we look at change. It doesn't mean we can't change, it just means we have to be careful about it. So in theory, that's like a really healthy balance. In reality, it's gotten more and more unhealthy. And so if our side wants to win, we got to really talk about what winning actually means. This is another problem I have with our current political movement. It seems that we're a little bit more interested in being entertained than we are with winning. Democrat voters are really interested in winning, if you haven't noticed. Democrat activists are really interested in winning. They get together, they register voters, they go knock on doors, they do what it takes to win. Remember where they come from, right? They come from organized labor. They're very good at organizing. The right has always been very individualistic when it comes to our activism, and as of late, I'm not sure that I see people wanting to win. I see some. I think YAF is one of the good ones. I think YAF is one of the organizations that clearly talks about winning. You bring people in, you get your education, and I think you're hearing the right things so that you can go take that out and then win. So what is winning? Well, winning is persuading in politics. So in war, you know, my background in SEAL teams, winning is something a little different. It means overtaking the enemy. Overtaking, it's a euphemism, but you know what we mean. But you're definitely not going to overtake the enemy with some wild-eyed charging of the hill, right? I mean, you might get lucky, but the most likely scenario is that you die on that hill. And there seems to be way too many people in politics who value dying on that hill a heck of a lot more than they value winning. So the real way you actually overtake the enemy is, let's say they're firing at you. First you like do this, and you never look cool when you're getting shot at. Like I would love it if when I got shot at, I was like, what was that? But it's not. You're like, ah! Like that's what was, and then you move, right? And so that's what actually happens. You find cover behind whatever cover is available, and then you start communicating with your teammates, and then you figure out how to overtake the enemy. You usually divide into maneuver element, a base element to fire, and then you tack around and hit them from the flank, and then you win. It doesn't look that sexy. I mean, it looks pretty cool, but it's not as sexy as charging the hill and winning like John Wick against a bunch of gunmen who, for some reason, just don't back away from him and shoot him. He is the most amazing enemies ever, right? I love the movies, but come on. So easy to kill John Wick. It's so easy. Anyway, that's a sidetrack. But the point is, that's how you win, right? Like, you got to calm down. You got to think about what winning looks like. And the same is in politics. And then you have to define what winning even is. Winning is not dying on a hill every single freaking week. It's not winning. There's no strategy to that. Winning is persuading, because you need to persuade people if you're going to win elections. Because if you're going to win on the policy front, if you're going to get your policies forward, which I would hope is our goal, then you actually have to have big wins on elections. You have to have majorities. In the Senate, you got to have a 60-vote majority. And they have to be sustainable. Right? You can't win a tiny little majority and then completely screw over your vulnerable members who won you that majority right away. So you have to win elections, you have to win majorities, and they have to be sustainable majorities. That's what winning actually looks like in politics. And it's not immediate, it's never immediate, and it's slow, and it's a little bit at a time, and it's one thing at a time. We had these kind of debates when we were talking about the debt ceiling vote, for instance. Why can't we get everything we want right now? Because we live in the political reality we live in. If you want to write a fiction novel about a different political reality, by all means, write that pretty little fiction novel, but it will be a fiction novel. Reality actually matters. And winning actually matters. And if we're going to persuade people, we got to talk about how we persuade people. You always have to start with your basic principles. And if we don't even understand what conservatism is and why it's a superior governing philosophy to liberalism, we're going to have a hard time explaining to someone why policy X, Y, and Z is also better than what the left wants. Because we don't even know the why of how we got to that policy conclusion in the first place. It's why I always talk about basic principles with groups like this, because it's always where you have to start. And then we can talk about the details of policy and how we actually apply those frameworks to each individual policy and why we're not contradicting ourselves, or how sometimes we are. It's important. Winning is important. And when you persuade somebody, whether it's in your class or one of your friends, you gotta ask, what kind of behavior is persuasive? Yelling and screaming is definitely not persuasive, right? Calling them names is definitely not persuasive. Owning the libs is not persuasive. It's good sometimes, right? I do it, but I do it for very specific reasons. I mean, we've always have to be calculated and measured in how we approach this, right? It's a strategy. It's the political game. And time again, though, you persuade someone by understanding where they're coming from first, understanding the psychology of their beliefs, which is why I talk about kind of the background of how liberals think, at least the good ones, the ones that are persuadable. The progressives are not persuadable. You can just own them. But you have to think about that because, look, it's good to be a conservative, but you don't have to be angry about it. There's too many people who just want to be angry about it and are very much only concerned with speaking to their own side because that's beneficial for them in the moment. And then when I say them, it could be a politician, it could be a podcaster, it could be a news host. There's a lot of them. And they're interested only in the political entertainment industry. They're not interested in helping you persuade people in your hometown so that you can actually win elections and get the policies that you care about moved forward. They're not interested in that at all. They're interested in you clicking on their website, on their podcast, on their donation button for their campaign. That's what they're interested in. They're not interested in you winning. They're fighting for something, I'll tell you that, but they're fighting for your attention. They're not fighting for you. Be very wary of those types. If we don't win against the left, we do run the risk of losing the freedoms that have made this country so great. And this is a great country. Remember Reagan said, you know, if we lose our freedoms here, there's nowhere else to escape to. Boy, is that true. It is fundamentally true. You see it in European countries, you see what's happening with their free speech laws. I mean, you see it in so many ways. You guys are informed on this. I don't need to explain it to you. Our country is such an amazing experiment. It's built on all the greatest ideas that humankind ever had. We were so lucky with our founding fathers, and they took all those great ideas from all throughout history, and they wrote them down in Philadelphia in 1776, and they said, this is why government should even exist. This was the first time anyone ever said this. It should exist to protect the individual rights of the citizen. Inalienable, natural rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the most important part of the Declaration of Independence. And then it complained about the British for a lot because they were being jerks. And then just over a decade later, we wrote the Constitution, which told us how we would actually implement that dream, right? It's like the guide. It's like the governing guide. And the Bill of Rights is how I would say, I guess, the cherry on top. It solidifies those things. And if we don't protect those, we have nothing left. We're the last country on earth that does it. I think we should be proud of that. And I don't think we should be too pessimistic either. There's always, it's constant, right? There's this constant negativity, like we're about to lose it all. Everything's about to go down the shitter. I don't necessarily think that's true. America's very hard to screw up, right? Geographically, we're pretty blessed. We've got a very stable constitution. There has been jackasses trying to screw up this country for a couple hundred years now. And honestly, they haven't been that successful. And I think a little bit of gratitude for our country and even what we've been through as a country might be in order every once in a while, because nobody wants to listen to somebody who's angry and resentful. It's a turn off. It's a turn off no matter what you're trying to talk to them about. So as we move forward, and the goal is winning, and the goal is persuading others, I need you to be happy warriors. I need you to be well-informed warriors. I need you to be warriors for freedom. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Look forward to your questions.
All right, we're going to start our Q&A section now. If you can just step up to the tape and please state your name, what school you go to, and a brief question.
Hello, my name is Nectaria. I go to California Lutheran University. My question is, given your recent bill aimed at blocking funding for children's hospitals that mutilate minors, why do you think the medical industry is so determined to mislead parents and families down this path?
Yeah, great question. And I guess the short answer is I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with them. I mean, neither do like 70% of Americans. You know, the Washington Post had the only polling I'm aware of is from the Washington Post that found that 70% of Americans are against hospitals using puberty blockers on minors. And so it's very specific. They only asked about puberty blockers. They didn't ask about surgical interventions, double mastectomies on a 13-year-old girl or castration of a 10-year-old boy. They didn't ask about any of that. Imagine what the numbers would be there. So it's hard to say. Look, ideologies are powerful things. These trends are powerful. They convince otherwise decent people that they're on the side of compassion and maybe some kind of like cutting edge knowledge. But they're just so obviously wrong. Look, I mean, every once in a while in history, that's true, that everybody else is wrong, but the one crazy person is right. Like, it does happen, but it's exceedingly rare. And I think a lot of these morons think that they're the exception this time, because I don't understand how else to interpret their possession and their dedication to this cause. Whether it's, you know, the head of the American Pediatrics Association, or just my Democrat colleagues who, like I said, like are calling me horrible things. I mean, they're calling me cruel, they're calling me incompassionate, all these things. And I'm like, what the? You were working on something together like 5 minutes ago, and now I'm a cruel, awful person. But I'm also like, you didn't believe this 10 minutes ago. You just didn't. There's no way. Like, this is a new trend. It's a social contagion. We can see it in the numbers of how quickly the cases of gender dysphoria have multiplied, and how that's so obviously related to peer pressure and social interactions and social media. We can see all of that. You know, I just did the interview on my podcast yesterday with Chloe Cole, who I know has spoken to YAF before, and, you know, incredibly brave girl who transitioned at 12, 13, and now is detransitioning. She's 18. And, you know, she describes these doctors as not necessarily pushing towards it, but it's almost like they run a fast food restaurant. They're like, okay, you want French fries? Okay, you can have French fries. Just take the French fries. Okay, you don't like the French fries? Okay, fine, we'll just have a burger. That's really how they are. You know, no pushback at all. Lots of pressure on her parents to, you know, do the right thing and do what her child wants, because her 12-year-old obviously knows what's best. I'm not giving you a great answer because I don't know. I don't know what possibly possesses these people. I just know that the way to fight them is using the words they use. This gets back to the art of persuasion. We're the compassionate ones, not them, right? So, you know, they call me cruel. I said, really, I'm the one who's cruel? Because I don't know, it might be cruel to do a double mastectomy on a 12-year-old girl who's already has suicidal thoughts, who already is being bullied at school and thinks that this might be her way out, and an adult who knows better isn't telling her otherwise. Maybe that's cruel.
Thank you for being here. Do you believe that TikTok under Mr. Chu is a threat to our national security?
Well, yeah. And so here's how we should talk about TikTok. And because look, TikTok's fun and it's super addicting. I get it. And a lot of young people don't really care that, say, their data is being stolen, because their question would be, well, what data? And why do I care? I don't care. I might give my data out anyway. Fine, take my data. So they don't care. My answer to them is, look, they might not be nefariously using your data now, but here's how data is used. It's used to build AI algorithms. Okay, it's used for machine learning. I mean, then ChatGPT, all of that. What it's doing is it's using the information that's on the internet, and it's making itself smarter. That's how AI works. When the Chinese have been collecting TikTok data and user preferences and user behavior for this long, and there's that much data, they will eventually figure out how to use it. And what are they going to do with it? They're going to put what they want in front of you. Maybe not now. I'm not saying they're doing that now. I have no evidence that they're doing that now. But, you know, we're not exactly in a super friendly relationship right now with China. And at any moment, I don't like the idea that they could manipulate 150 million users on TikTok in the United States. That's what I don't like. That's what scares me. They've also lied to us. You know, I think they've broken our trust in many ways. And so it is a threat, and it's so easily replaceable. You know, I'm no fan of our other social media giants, but they're also not China trying to potentially undermine our country. And that's what I would tell people about the potential harm of TikTok.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your speech today. I'm Adria from Catalonia, Barcelona. I study at the University of Exeter in England. And my question is, yourself as a veteran, having lived the experiences that you lived through war and now a congressman, what's your view on what it should be the United States foreign policy in regards to deadly conflicts, such as the war in Ukraine, or non-deadly conflicts that challenge sovereignty in other countries, such as the Catalan independence?
Yeah, good question. So my general view is that it's in the interest of the United States to live in a world where people aren't invading people. Why? It didn't matter all that much, like a really long time ago. I was going to say the 1700s, but honestly, even during our revolution, the French thought it was in their interest to actually help us beat the British. Even back then, even when it took months to cross the Atlantic, even when world trade really wasn't even close to what it is today, you know, they didn't have much back then. There was no reason for world trade, but even back then, it was obviously in their national interest, right? Because their adversary was Britain at the time. And so the entire world that we know, every good thing that we know, is because of over the last 70 years since World War II, America has said everyone's going to shut the hell up and stop fighting. That's been the American way for the last 70 years, and everybody alive, I think, probably takes it for granted. Not everybody, but a lot. They take that reality for granted, but that reality is just a really small, unique picture in time. The true reality of human existence for thousands of years is people rising to power and taking things they want from other people. And in that world, there was no iPhones. In that world, there wasn't indoor plumbing. In that world, there was nothing that we have today. Why? Because you couldn't trade globally, you couldn't specialize, you couldn't just relax and think about how your business was going to get whatever widgets it needs for its supply chain so that you could sell to your customer. Maybe you buy that from Cambodia, maybe you buy that from Mexico, whatever. You couldn't even think about it in years past because everyone was just at war all the time. It was not a safe world. Now it's different. And we cannot run the risk of going back to that other world. And so when I look at something like, people ask, well, what difference does it make to us if like Putin runs Ukraine? I say, well, here's the thing. One, you're totally naive and foolish if you think that's where he stops. You're a total fool. And two, you simply have an interest in a world where that doesn't happen because the Chinese are watching that and they're thinking, nobody does anything about that. Maybe we should just take this little island right here. They have a lot of semiconductors, and it's ours. You know, that's what they think anyway, just like Putin thinks Ukraine is his. And so where does it stop? It never stops. You know, not too long ago, the Iranians tried to take over a couple cargo ships going through the Straits of Hormuz, and it was the US Navy that got in their way and said, no, you can't do that. You can't just steal shit, Iran. And so they went away. But you have to imagine the counterfactuals in all of these. So let's say the U.S. doesn't exist. Iran would take those cargo ships. Well, guess what happens to now cargo shipping and you getting everything that you'd use on a daily basis? And I mean everything. People are like, well, I can live without some luxuries. No, I mean everything. Well, insurance prices just went up massively because now insurance is costlier for shippers, and everything you like just got way more expensive, maybe impossibly more expensive. Maybe they stopped shipping it completely. Everything changes. If Russia had plowed through Ukraine because we were like, we don't care, right? The entire Russian military would be intact and on the border of 4 more NATO countries, why would they stop? Why would there not be another World War III? I'm so tired of people saying that supporting Ukraine is pushing us into World War III. Not supporting Ukraine, you'd already be in World War III. That's the truth. So American leadership is essential. And allies are essential because it is too much for just us to do. And we should we should tell them, to Germans, like, spend more on your military, you jerks. I don't care about your like really awkward history. Just spend more on your military. We should be telling them that because, look, it should never be the U.S. versus China. That will never be what happens. It should be the entire world, minus Russia and Iran and North Korea, versus China. That should be what happens, and that's how we have to look at it.
Hello, Dan. My name is Vincent. Vince Corey. I am from St. Louis University. I wanted to ask you on your thoughts regarding wind and solar energy and perhaps other energy resources, and how you project how they're going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, if not longer.
Yeah. So wind and solar, just energy mix in general. I mean, look, I'm all for mitigating emissions just generally, right? Just as a simple risk mitigation factor. It's a fairly conservative approach to take to general problem solving. You know, is all the science on climate change like real and perfect? Like, absolutely not, and certainly not as there's no consensus the way they say there is. That being said, there's something, right? There's something to it is my general take, and I don't know enough. Nobody really knows exactly what. So if we can mitigate it without excessive costs, then that's fine. Right, and so I'm perfectly happy with clean energy and pushing toward clean energy. Solar and wind can work great in certain geographies, you know, places where there's a lot of wind and a lot of sun, and really there's no displacement, environmentally speaking, of anything else. Otherwise, it's really not a great option. It's intermittent, causes problems for the grid if you use too much of it on any given electrical grid. I think that's a big part of our problem in Texas, to be honest, is that wind is starting to take up more and more of our overall capacity, but it's intermittent. And what that does is it causes disinvestment in more reliable forms of energy like gas, coal, and nuclear. So that's the real problem I have with it. I have other problems too, which is the way it's built, the way it's imported from China, the amount of rare earth minerals that are required to even make this stuff, the fact that it's not recyclable. I mean, so there's a lot of other environmental factors with solar and wind that are just not taken into account. You know, this is the same conversation as surrounding electric vehicles. It takes the new studies on electric vehicles for truly comparable cars, it's like 70,000 miles that have to be driven before that breaks even as far as carbon emissions go with an internal combustion engine. So that's like a really big number. Really big number. So that actually means that if you just forced everyone into EVs in the short term, you'd actually increase global emissions. Like that's just the math. That is not an opinion. That is just how the math works. Long term, you can reduce it, but in the short term, you would increase it. And also, people don't drive that much with electric vehicles. They kind of keep them inside urban areas. So there's really no guarantee you're ever going to get to 70,000 miles in the next 10 years. I've had my car since 2007. It's not at 100,000 miles yet, right? Because I deployed a lot, right? I lived in Coronado. My base was like a mile away. We just didn't drive that much. So it's perfectly plausible that in much of these cases, they never actually even break even. So look, solar and wind, I'm not against them. I just don't think that they're even close to the answer, and they definitely shouldn't be subsidized by taxpayers to the large extent that they have. If we're gonna go all in on something, it needs to be nuclear energy because it's reliable and it's clean. So fine, you get the best of both worlds. Like I don't understand why it's a debate. I will say we've made a lot of progress on this with the crazy environmentalists. You know, I go to these UN climate change conferences. I've been in the last 2. And nuclear had like no presence, and then it had some, and I think it'll have more this year. It's, you know, and you've got like the detractors like AOC saying like, yeah, no, nuclear's good now. We hated it, now it's good. So our messaging and our facts and our persuasion has started to have some real benefits.
Hello, Representative Crenshaw. I'm from Texas. I'm Jake. I go to Brigham Young University in Utah. Why did you vote in favor of the euphemistically named Respect for Marriage Act this past session? I
don't know, man, because I didn't. So you're going to have to, I think, check your facts. Yeah, Respect for Marriage Act, no, I did vote. Wait, that's the one you want. Wait a second. Which one are you talking about?
It was euphemistically named in favor of gay marriage.
No, it wasn't in favor.
Yeah, it was.
That was a hard vote, but I actually voted no. Yeah. Check that again and come back. I'll be honest, it was a hard vote. But I remember this situation pretty clearly. So check that again. Yeah.
Yeah, you voted against it. You did.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Caleb Nunez. I'm from Northwestern, and in a free market system, the diversity and human ability inevitably leads to economic inequality. I don't think that this economic inequality needs to be remedied by the government, but I think it's worth acknowledging the social division that comes with these wealth disparities. And I think that these wealth disparities are contributing to the populist right. For example, J.D. Vance went from writing a book about how the entitlement state was destroying the white family, and now he repeats the same liberal lies about social programs like Social Security. Is there a solution to the social discord that comes with this inequality that doesn't come at the expense of our other values like economic freedom?
Yeah, really well articulated question. And I totally agree with your assessment as well. So, yeah, there has to be, look, the way is, state the conservative principles, but we have to, I think, explain them and I think renew them in a little bit more with a compassionate sense to them. So, yeah, it makes me upset as well that you can go from writing a book like that to exactly what you just said, right? Expounding what are basically Democrat redistribution policies that are a Band-Aid to a problem, right? They don't fix the underlying issue. And we have to be talking about fixing underlying issues, but then also be able to talk about metrics to get there. And it's hard because it almost always seems incompassionate, right? And we could focus on, say, how to renew or how to reform, welfare laws. And what is the right amount of, first of all, what's the right amount of aid? What's the right amount of time to give that aid? What's the right amount of work requirements to do that? Because what are you trying to create? Independence versus dependence. So we always have to start, I think, when we talk about this stuff with our initial underlying principle. I don't know that we need a bunch of brand new ideas. We might want to make it easier to adopt. We might want to make it easier to build a family. But also we did that. I mean, the child tax credit's a Republican idea. It'll likely go a little higher. The next Republican tax plan, the standard deduction will go higher. That's going to be easier for families. We have to explain to people what actually creates wealth. And so I think that's the first element of persuasion that we have to engage in, because if you're just arguing with them on their terms, you're actually arguing on the wrong terms, because they believe things that aren't true. They believe that inequality is created because of these injustices, when in reality, it's complicated. It's complicated and often can be perpetuated by redistribution policies that actually create dependency. And so we do have to get it right on what the actual problem is. And generally speaking, a problem might be, well, okay, you wasted a bunch of time at college. I'm not saying don't go to college. I'm not turning point, don't go to college. No, you should go to college if it makes sense for you. But for a lot of people, though, it makes a lot more sense to get a 6-month certification and then make $75K a year, doing pipe welding in Houston. I mean, we have to be talking about that and making it easier to build up those programs, especially at the state level. We also have to point out that, look, we're for small business economics. I think that's the term we should use. We talk about free market, we talk about capitalism. We should say we're for small business economics. So what does that mean? It means the kind of policies that would make it easier for a small business to thrive. And so what does that mean? It means lower taxation and less complicated regulation, because small businesses don't have armies of consultants and lawyers and compliance offices and all that. They just want it to be easy. They want to understand when they're breaking the law and when they're not. They shouldn't need a high-priced law firm to tell them that. And so when you focus on these, you do take a huge bite out of inequality. We also have to tell people the truth about what has happened with inequality over the years. There's massive improvements. There's really big lies told by the left on what the nature of inequality is. The truth about it is that it's highly likely in this country that you will move from the bottom quintile up a quintile, highly likely if you just do really basic stuff correct. Like go to school, don't get arrested, et cetera, like get married, very basic stuff. That tells me, that's an indicator that we don't have some horribly unjust system in place. To the extent that you can help people who just don't have access to an uncle who happens to be a lawyer and somebody who can like help them through life, they don't have a father figure, those are really hard problems. I don't know how to fix the biggest problem we have with respect to inequality, which is a fatherless home. That is the #1 factor. And so if we can figure that out, that'd be great. A lot of it might be just simply better programs at the school level. I don't know, more security. Stop claiming it's not compassionate to discipline kids, because when 3% of the classroom is disrupting the entire school, that's a problem. Nobody can learn. I didn't give you like an exact answer because it's a hard one, but it's a good question, and they're telling me to wrap up. So, thank you.
Okay, that's going to conclude our Q&A portion. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you all very much.